Today I'm going to show you how to make tomato soup. I'm going to show you two versions, one an American style creamy warm tomato soup and the other a more European with a little bit of bite. First things first, the ingredients. To make one batch of soup I'm going to use 1 kilogram of tomatoes, half a kilogram of mixed onions and about 100 grams of fairly high fat butter. Now, I'm actually going to be making twice that, so I'm just going to double up. You can multiply or divide out the ingredients to suit whatever you're going to do. This is the basic American warm flavoured soup. This is all you need, 3 ingredients. If, like me, you're making the warmer version today, then you'll need, in addition to the other ingredients, a couple of teaspoons of paprika, some garlic salt, a whole garlic and a couple of chili peppers. Now, I know that looks like a lot of chilies, and if you want to cut back a bit, then do so to your taste. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a couple of fresh peppers from the garden today, so I'm going to chop them up and add them as well. I wouldn't recommend adding them to the creamy version, but if you're going for the hot and spicy, then a bell pepper adds just a little bit of extra flavour and texture. Now down to the equipment that you'll need to make your soup. You'll want a nice large pan. You'll see that I've gone for one that's about 4 litres because I'm actually doubling up on the ingredients. So you'll need one perhaps a little bit smaller if you're only using 1 kilogram of tomatoes. You'll obviously need a nice sharp chopping knife and a paring knife and a spoon to stir up and a nice clean chopping board. Strongly recommend that you clean everything you use between each of the ingredients that you cut up. The last thing you want to do is to accidentally wipe some chili into your eyes whilst you're cooking. Now I've put the basic ingredients into the pan. I've started with the butter, the garlic salt, the paprika, and I've also added in some salt. You may want to add this later so that you can put in salt to your particular taste. If you're on a low sodium diet, you may want to leave it out altogether. It's not essential, there's plenty of flavour in the rest of the ingredients. It's a good idea to put the butter in at the bottom so that it melts when you start to heat the pan, causing the liquids to move up through the soup and giving it a good soupy texture more quickly. The next job is to chop up the chilies. Now, if you're making the warm, creamy version of the soup, then this step can be missed. I find that the easiest way to take the seeds out of the chilies is to do it underwater and to cut them open with a pair of kitchen scissors rather than a knife. Once the chili's been chopped up, it can be added to the pot. But don't be too worried if the pieces look bigger than you feel that they should be. At the end we'll be blending the soup anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Once that's done, this would be a good time to clean your hands and your chopping board and your knife before moving on to the next ingredient. The next job is to cut open and de-seed the 2 peppers. Again, if you're making the warm version of the soup, this step is unnecessary. In fact, it's unnecessary even if you're making the hot version. I just add them in because I like the flavour. The bell peppers don't need to be cut into very, very small pieces, not as small as the chilli, so don't waste time and get carried away cutting it into minuscule little pieces. The size that I'm showing you here is more than enough. The next step is the garlic. Now, the temptation is just to squeeze it in a press into the pan, but I would recommend doing it properly, as shown on my chopping board here. From the garlic at the top, break it into the individual pieces, peel each piece and then chop it as finely as you can. This ensures that you retain as much of the oil as possible and also means that you get the texture of the garlic added into the soup as well. So the garlic is now chopped up and ready to go in the pan. It may sound a bit excessive to go to these lengths, but trust me, it's worth making the effort. Now would be a good time to clean your board and your hands and knife because the garlic oil gets everywhere. It's quite pervasive. Now everybody's favourite job, chopping the onions. I've gone for a 50-50 mix of regular onions and some nice red onions. The red onions do add a nice bit of colour to the soup, but it's certainly not vital. You'll want to wash, skin and then chop the onions. Now be careful when you chop them not to cut them into too small pieces. Otherwise you lose the fresh oniony flavour that you get at the end of the soup when you blend it. The size I've shown on the board does seem to be about right. So with the onions all chopped up and added to the pan, we're ready now for our final ingredient, the tomatoes. If you're looking at the pan and thinking, I should have picked a bigger pan, then don't worry. As soon as you start to cook, the volume will drop down to about 80%. So as long as it doesn't overflow the pan when you start cooking, you should be okay. As with the onions, make sure that you don't cut the tomato into too smaller pieces. The sizes shown on the board in front of you are about right. Just make sure that you cut out any woody stalks that are at the top of the tomato. All of the ingredients are now in the pan and we're ready to start cooking. Now for the first few seconds you want the gas to be on quite high just to get some heat into the pan. I've put this on the back burner, which for me gives me the greatest distribution across the bottom of the pan. Once it's started to heat up and you can hear the butter at the bottom beginning to pop, then you want to bring it right down as low as you can, just to bring it to a simmer gently. If you can hear the butter spitting, then you've got it up too high. As you can see, I'm using a pan with a decent lid. The last thing that you want is to lose any of the juices and flavour evaporating out of steam. This is not a soup that you're keen to reduce. You want to keep all of the ingredients and all of the flavour inside it. You need to make sure that you give it a good stir during these first few minutes to make sure that all of your ingredients get thoroughly mixed together. Soon you should be able to see the butter and other juices starting to bubble at the edge of the pan. It's very important at this point to make sure that it doesn't come to a boil and it doesn't go any stronger than a simmer. If you let your mixture bubble and start to boil, you will lose some of the flavour. Now the mixture is starting to simmer. This is where you want to start the clock. 40 minutes seems to be enough, even if you're doubling up on the ingredients. Don't be tempted to cook it for longer than 40 minutes, otherwise you'll end up losing flavour. So, this has been bubbling away now for about 20 minutes, and you can see that the consistency has changed quite a lot. You might also have noticed that I've topped up the ingredients by adding a few extra tomatoes as I've gone along, because I want to make sure that I can fill up the jars that I'm going to use. A little bit of activity on the top. It might be a little bit too hot, but certainly you don't want it to get any hotter than this. We have maybe another 20 minutes and then it'll be ready to mix up and blend. There is of course one vital ingredient that I've neglected to mention, and that's a nice glass of cognac whilst you're waiting for your soup to cook. Cheers. So that's about it. It's been simmering now for 40 minutes, and when you stir it, which you should do about once every couple of minutes, you should feel that there's almost no resistance from the ingredients anymore. Next I'll show you how to blend it so that it's ready to eat. Next I use a hand blender. You could use any type of food processor, but I find that a hand blender is less aggressive. When you've mixed it up thoroughly, this is the consistency of your final soup. Next I'll show you how to sterilise the jars that you'll use to store your soup. First I put a pan on the hob, and inside I'm boiling water to sterilise the lids. Next, I put this implement on top of the pan, which you can buy from most local stores around here. The jar sits on top of this, and the steam from the boiling water is used to sterilise the jar. You should leave about 5 minutes to make sure that the jar is thoroughly sterilised. Next, transfer your soup into the jar. You want to make sure that the jar is full as possible, even to the point of overflowing, because the last thing you want is any air inside the jar if you're planning on storing it for any period of time. Now, using one of the lids that you've boiled in the pan, seal the jar ready for storage. You should invert the jar and set it somewhere cool overnight until the jar completely cools down. With my 2 kilograms of tomatoes, I've made enough soup to completely fill a 1.5 litre jar, plus 2 smaller 700 millilitre jars. This is enough for approximately 8 adult servings of tomato soup. So there you have it, homemade tomato soup. Trust me, after eating this you'll never buy a Heinz tomato soup again. And what could be better with a slab of bread for those long Ukrainian winter nights? I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave comments if you have any suggestions or any improvements. Bye for now.